Well, a good Thursday morning to you, and thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Ryan Jesperson here with you, along with the intrepid Samuel G. Brooks, senior producer of this show.
Good morning.
We've got a good show in store for today. You ready to go? You're all buckled in.
Betcha.
I see, because we've got a lot of ground to cover today. 4 guests as it stands right now, and you never know what might happen. If news develops between now and the end of today's show, maybe we'll hear from more. But in just a second, we're going to be hearing from a respiratory therapist that was among the first in the province of Alberta to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. Robyn Strain will be joining us out of the University of Alberta Hospital coming up in just moments. We're also today going to be talking to political scientist Dr. Jared Wesley. We're going to be talking about some numbers in the province of Alberta that show where people are feeling right now with political inclinations, how COVID-19 is impacting how people are feeling. So we'll get into that data, some pretty interesting stuff. We're also going to talk to an artist. April is going to join us coming up in the 10 o'clock hour, and I'm very excited to check in with her, April Prescott. We've not spoken before. I don't know much about her, but I did see yesterday after we spoke with John Mark Earl. I'm not sure if you saw that or not. That interview was one of the wildest interviews that I've ever been a part of. John Mark Earl marking the 1-year anniversary of his first ice bath in Peace River, and he took us literally into the river yesterday. It was absolutely incredible. Minus 26 with the wind chill. He and his son Jeremiah were in there for what, Sam? A couple of minutes, I think. They were in the water for...
I think it was about 2 minutes, yeah.
2 minutes. So it was minus 17. It was minus 26 with the wind chill. They obviously got into the water with axes. Like, they had to clear an area. Totally bananas. And April... following that interview, puts out this piece of art. I retweeted it if you want to see it. You can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Jesperson, and sort of immortalized John Mark Earl with one of the quotes. And as a matter of fact, I can just read it right here on my MacBook Pro, because I actually, and I'll tell April this again when we check in with her today, but I made it my desktop background.
Well, yeah.
Her art. It's
people
phenomenal.
keep doing art of our show.
I know, right? So
yeah.
look at what she did here. This of John Mark Earl. It's absolutely incredible. And she quoted him, something he told us: "Some choices require us to embrace discomfort and to remain in control. Those things determine how we move through our life." Pretty beautiful, right?
Especially given that, like, this is the live quote he gave us while he was sitting in a river on live. Like live, I was going to say TV. This isn't really TV. Live YouTube. Yeah,
it's a live broadcast.
It's a live broadcast.
It's a live show.
Yeah, I kind of had in my head that, like, if we got to the day where we were doing live hits from things, like, we'd rent an F-55 and I'd go out there and actually do like a broadcast setup.
Nobody knows what an F-55 is.
Big broadcast camera that sits on your shoulder.
There you go. The big 40-pound camera.
Yeah, and like, we'd do it upright. We'd do it like a broad. No, our first ever, like, live on location hit was a guy diving into the river.
Yeah.
It was great.
There you
I
go.
loved it. This is real talk. This is what we do here.
I don't see any of the big broadcast players going live from Peace River, taking you into the water. I don't see anybody doing. See, they were just throwing a little shade here. Speaking of shade, did you can we switch to our GoPro shot? We've got to find a sponsor for that camera. Who wants to sponsor this camera? Is there anything that you see right now, friends? So Eric Chung Eric Chung a few days ago became the first Real Talk audience member to correctly note that our on-air light had flipped around. So, Sam, can you take, is it camera 1, the shot on me? Can you take the shot on me for a second? So Eric correctly identified here. It's always like trying to read in a rearview mirror. But right there, Eric identified that previously that had been, when you took Sam Brooks' shot, we'll call it camera 2 for now.
It's actually camera 3.
It's 3. What's 1?
1 is you, 2 is guest, which is not hooked up right now.
Oh, right.
And 3 is me.
Because of our COVID.
Yeah.
Look at Sam. See, it's Sam's humility. He's putting the guest before himself. So Sam is camera 3. Does that make our GoPro for now camera 4?
Yeah. So we have 1, 3, and 4.
We have 1, 3, and 4.
It's a complicated setup.
Okay. So on 3 now, you can see that the on-air light is backwards. So on 1, the on-air light is correctly reading on air in the reflection of our plexiglass. Eric Chung was the first to identify that on our YouTube stream, and he earned 2 points.
Which he said he's saving cash in at another time.
It makes sense he would save his points because right now, and everybody's like, even the hardcore Real Talk fans that you watch every day live, and you're going, wait, points? What? It's not a thing. all we know, we don't have points. We don't have a system yet. We don't really have a tally. It's easy to track now because Eric Chung is the only person with points, and he has 2 of them. And someday
he's gloating about them right now.
Well, he should be.
Yeah, I know.
So he's back right now, live again. You know
he
what?
is. Oh yeah, he's in the chat right now.
You know what? You know what? As a matter of fact, because Eric happened to be here right now, not knowing I was going to talk about him, but here he is again. Eric, you know what? 3 points for you now. Eric's now got 3 points. Now, if we can take camera 4, Sam, which is up for grabs, potential sponsors.
I like how this is the first time you've learned the camera numbering.
Well, because why have I needed to know the numbers?
That's true. You don't.
You know, there's a lot of other numbers swirling around in my head. I don't need to know the camera number. But it is good to know because now I can say, Sam, take camera 3. Sam, take camera 3.
Take camera 3.
All right. Okay. So Sam takes camera.
3.
All right. How about a nice dissolve to camera 4? I'm not trying to mess with. We're just having.
Yeah, you're putting the video switcher through the paces. That's what you're doing right now.
But up for grabs, and we have a respiratory therapist on the line, so we better.
We do. She's been watching this whole conversation.
We better hurry the hell up before she's
enjoying it.
before we hang up. She hangs up on us. 2 points up for grabs for the first person, and Sam, you can monitor this for the first person that identifies. Just give him camera 4 again for one. See, now that I know the numbers, Sam's screwed because I'm gonna be doing this all the time. 2 points to the first person that notices what's different about the Real Talk studio this morning.
Oh, I believe that goes to Cam in a Pizzeria. That is his username.
Again, if you could just, Sam, we want to be careful. We correctly pronounce people's names, you know. So it's actually, I don't mean to correct you, but it's technically a Cam in a Pizzeria. Okay. We respect your heritage, Cam, and we want to reflect, you know, where you're coming at us from today.
Yeah.
Okay,
anyways,
so
Cam has pointed out that the lights are now mounted in the ceiling.
Okay, so can we take camera 4 again to show everybody what Samuel Brooks did in his spare time yesterday?
Yeah.
No more light stands.
No more light stands.
No more big stands and tripods. Well, we got a few camera shots, but nothing cluttering the floor of the Real Talk studio.
Yeah.
We all recognize your selfishness, though, Sam. You're humble, but you can be selfish as well. And you know what I realized what you did is keep camera 4 up. Everyone, you can see the path Sam would walk to the Real Talk beer fridge. All he's done is create a clear lane between his producer desk and the Real Talk beer fridge. That was the true motivation. But
you already moved the coffee maker right next to me here, which is dangerous.
I did you that solid.
Yeah. That was great.
Well, it's because it was giving me anxiety every time you would walk past you because you duck under the camera shot while I was interviewing people.
It also means I'm going to share a little something with you with the viewers here. Is
okay.
It also means that you can ask me to make you a coffee in the middle of the show,
which
you have done.
I have done one time, and
it's great. It's a good system.
It was risky because it gave me kind of like a loaded scenario where you ask someone to get you a coffee, right? Like if a new person showed up at a job and then you said to the new person, "Hey man, you want to go run and get me a coffee?" They'd be like, "Fuck you, man." Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you mean, go get you a coffee? What are you talking about? Like, I'm here to, you know, I have my MBA. I'm here to do this thing, right? You know, but with you, it was more of like I hope that you saw it in my eyes. It was kind of like a.
Oh, I don't mind refreshing your coffee.
Sam, I would do it myself.
It's right here next to me.
Do
it's
you
great.
mind? And so there you go. But it was not like a get me a coffee thing.
No, not one. I never took it that way.
Because Sam would just get up and leave is what he could do. And then we'd just have to stick on camera 1 all day, and it would be a boring show. Let's remind you right now that Bitcoin Well is the title sponsor of this show. You know, we're starting the show later and later every morning. It's 8:40 now. We told Robyn Strain, respiratory therapist, we told her like 8:33. She's sitting here going like, anytime now.
Yep.
So Bitcoin has boomed again. It's way back up there again, like more than the last time we talked about it. And I know for a lot of you, because some of you chime in because you know, like Bitcoin Well is our title sponsor, so you're always like, hey, like Rod Maldaner yesterday texted me. He said, hey, how's Bitcoin's looking pretty good because Rod's in on the game, right? He knows what's up. He goes to Bitcoin Well for his buying and selling and making sense of it all. So Adam O'Brien, who's the CEO, have you seen his new clothing line? He just released it yesterday. Go to Bitcoin Well's website. It's amazing. I tweeted about it as well if you want to find it. He's released a new clothing line with the logo Bitcoin Well on it, and it just says, I told you so. It's pretty amazing. So if you'd like to get your hands on an I Told You So t-shirt and I Told You So hoodie, if you want to wear it around with pride as you think about where your Bitcoin's at, you can find it all via the Bitcoin Well website. All right, let's go.
Real Real Talk starts now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
All right, 8:41 on this Thursday morning, coming up at 9 o'clock. We'll get to the headlines. Aaron O'Toole, by the way, issuing an apology for his comments at Ryerson University about residential schools. Whether Canadians accept the apology or not, I think people still have some questions about it. We're going to get to that. Robyn Strain, meantime, our leadoff guest this morning. Robyn's been a respiratory therapist at the University of Alberta Hospital here in Alberta's capital city, Edmonton, for the last 16 years. She's worked everywhere from emergency to the stollery with the youngest patients, but now mainly resides in the general system and the cardiovascular ICU, resident of St. Albert with her family, her husband Craig as well, and Robyn yesterday becoming one of the very first Albertans to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Robyn, welcome to Real Talk and good morning to you.
Good morning, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.
How are you feeling today? I mean, I would imagine received vaccines in past in your life. How did this one compare?
It was very comparable to when I got the flu shot. I have a sore arm again today, but I just feel like there was a lot of excitement in the air with this one. So that was very different. And yeah, it's just kind of a surreal experience, not thinking it would happen this soon and getting it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Pretty cool.
The timeline of it, and we've been learning more about, going behind the scenes of the researchers and the incredible human beings that developed this vaccine on what the timeline looked like and how quickly this came together. As a healthcare professional yourself, I would imagine that there was great anticipation because while we still have months to go here, no doubt, this marks a very significant point in the journey, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. And it was getting to the point at the hospital where there's a lot of dark days. You didn't know what was happening. And this is really a light, I think, that people needed. It just, every day going into work, you didn't really know what you were going to get. And it usually wasn't good. So I just think this was really needed. And it just signals there is an end in sight.
Robyn, with regards to the vaccine itself, can you take, my understanding is that yesterday you had an appointment, right? It wasn't like show up whenever and get it. You were at 12:40 p.m. on the nose. Can you describe? Can you take us, as we say, behind the curtain and tell us what it was like? How many people were there to get it? How long it took? What the mood was or the vibe was in the room? I'm assuming it was all frontline health workers. Is that right?
As far as I'm aware of, it was a little bit different than I expected. As far as it's like an unmarked building. It felt pretty hush-hush, like I kind of didn't really know where I was going. And then you're trying to buzz in and security brings you into this building where it really does not look like a vaccination site. I think because they were trying to keep people pretty spaced out with COVID, it wasn't busy. So I just had to bring my ID and then got my vaccination, people with full PPE, and was out in 15 minutes. It was actually a lot quicker than I expected. And yeah, it was pretty easy and I felt great. So I never reacted to a vaccine before. So
and I guess that's big, right? They're saying that, there have been a few examples of people that have received this vaccine in the UK going into an anaphylactic shock, and they've suggested, at least British health authorities have suggested, that if you've had a history of anaphylactic reactions, which would be rare to vaccines or food, that's something you should talk to your doctor about. But no sort of allergic reaction with regards to what your experience was, and now I guess we're closing in on 18 hours later. You're feeling pretty good? Yeah,
I feel great, and other coworkers that got it yesterday too. Everybody feels good, and as far as I can tell now, all no complications. So that's good. Yeah, and I think there's a couple of people that have had reactions to vaccines in the past and are just holding off for a little bit, just till further notice and see what's recommended. So,
Robyn, I would imagine your work as a respiratory therapist, with regards to the symptoms of COVID-19, the impact that it has on people, I would imagine that your work is directly related to COVID-19. Am I correct? Can you describe what your work has looked like over the past, let's say 9 or 10 months?
Well, it's kind of crazy how it's progressed because in the beginning, it was lots of learning, just how to deal with these patients, how to protect ourselves. Protocols changed, just how we do things, just because of how contagious it was. I feel the biggest changes definitely have been with the surge in the last few months. I remember the shift I came in, and we have a patient workload, and we mark it with blue dots, patients that have COVID. And it always went from a few. There was always a bunch in the hospitals, but usually on the floors. And then the day I got in, and it was just almost all blue. Like that really got me, because if that happens every day, it's just not feasible to keep up with. Like, you cannot have that many patients come in a day and care for them all well. And then just as every change happened, like all of a sudden one day I come in and now there's multiple patients, or 2 patients in each room, and then it's moving to other ICUs, and on the floors, you have units that were designated COVID units, and it's just the slow sprawl across the whole hospital. And wanting to protect the other patients around it, right, that get close to the sprawl, has also been pretty stressful. So it's been crazy, and they've had to keep on augmenting. Like now we are, because there was new development for the stollery, they've moved patients around. So we have another ICU that they're setting up right now to be completely COVID. They're trying to get equipment right now, but the question they don't know is how they're actually going to fully staff it. So
yeah, that's the thing, right? We talked to Dr. Shazma Mathani a while ago about that, an ER physician who reminded us that, beds and ventilators are one thing, but skilled and experienced workers, health professionals is an entirely different conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're redeploying employees from different areas, like maybe the K clinic and other places, to do what they can to try and offset some of maybe if they don't have as much critical care experience, they can at least help out with some of the routine things that we need to do. We had to change how we do some of our workload just to be what is actually feasibly possible in a day. So it's been a real shift for that. And most full-timers are working overtime. I myself, I'm a part-timer currently. After I had kids, I kind of moved down, but I've been picking up too close to full-time, and I think I'll be there soon. They upped my it's called FTE, my percentage of full-time. They increased it during this pandemic, as they did for many other part-timers, just to cover the workload, because they've had extra employees on every shift.
So everybody's doing what they can, obviously, to meet the demand, so to speak. I'm making it sound like overstaffing a sport check for Christmas time, but we're talking about critical care units here with regards to COVID patients. What sort of an impact is it having on? You're coming across as pretty measured and relatively calm. You're not hitting the panic button, at least you don't appear to be. But how would you gauge how you're feeling, and how are you gauging the impact that you're seeing the patient load and the workload is having on you and your colleagues? Are spirits high? Is morale positive? What are you noticing?
There's been a bit of a balance. You definitely see a lot more panic in your coworkers every day. Like even being a respiratory therapist, and COVID is mainly it results in a pneumonia. So these patients are very high workload for us, and you can see the panic in their eyes when they can't breathe. And then you're trying to put on all your PPE to get in there fast enough, and it's just like you get call after call after call, and it's just trying to get there fast enough. So that kind of stuff, by the end of the day, your stress load is definitely high. I think the fact that everybody's come together at work to try and help each other out has been a big positive. Our managers have been amazing, checking in us multiple times in a day to make sure that we are doing okay. Lots of support from outside. We get tons of cards from schools, and that's really puts a little positive note in the day. But the days can be pretty high stress, where you're paging out for help, you're constantly running into rooms, and it's just nothing quite like it. Seeing a patient that can't breathe and the fear in their eyes, that is, definitely weighs in on you. So,
have you've been in this career you're coming up on 17 years. Have you ever, is there anything that you've experienced through the course of your career that you can compare to this, with regards to what you're seeing, the challenges that your patients are encountering physically, the demand on staff, how you're being tapped with regards to the implications of this on your workload? I mean, is this with almost 20 years of experience as a respiratory therapist? I guess the real question is, how different is this from anything else you've experienced?
Oh, it's completely different. It's completely different for the mental health of the nurses and of the patients. It's like patients are alone, especially the COVID. It's predominantly COVID patients right now in our units. And we come in, you can see nothing but our eyes through the glare of our visors, and they're alone. They have no family, and we don't even have the time to spend with them to give them much comfort, because we're getting pulled so many areas. And never before have you had to change how you work so much every day. Like, new protocols are going out saying, well, you don't have to see your patients quite as often. It has to be more as needed basis, just because you don't have time to. So like, it's such a balance too, like wanting to give every patient the best care possible, wanting to give them comfort when they're alone, they have no family. The ones that are aware enough maybe have a cell phone by their head to hear some reassurance from family. And just the sprawl, because the general systems ICU is the main COVID ICU, but it's moving to every other ICU now just because it can't handle that workload. So it's, at times in the hospital, I've had one area be quite busy, but it's not everywhere you go where everybody's calling for help. So it's definitely nothing like what I've experienced before. Well,
you talked about the notes that you've received from kids and those types of things, and the impact that it has on encouraging you. We're receiving a ton of messages. I'm getting them live right now on our YouTube thread here, Robyn, as well as our Real Talk RJ hashtag, and people are just communicating how grateful they are for what you're doing and for what you're doing to serve Albertans. And I just want to really sincerely. I need to look into her eyes, Sam. There we are. I want to sincerely thank you for what you're doing, for going to work every single morning, for putting what I have to imagine would be very stressful circumstances, for putting those into a place where you're processing them mentally, but still delivering the care that Albertans need right now. And so, and I'm even serious in asking you to pass our gratitude along to your colleagues. The next time that you walk into there, the next time you walk into the U of A hospital or wherever else you will be assigned to literally help save people's lives, thank you sincerely for what you're doing, Robyn.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Honestly, all the support, you really, I do think as far as morale goes too, people have really, like, the community coming together. It makes a huge difference. You feel supported, you feel like people have your back, and it makes it a lot easier.
Robyn Strain is a respiratory therapist, has been for 16 years at the University of Alberta Hospital, yesterday becoming one of the very first Albertans to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Thanks for talking to us about it, and we wish you good health.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Robyn. Really appreciate her making time for us today. We'll fit in a quick break, and then I want to get to some of the comments that we have here. A big part of our show each and every morning is hearing, finding out, listening to what you have to say, and so we appreciate everything that you have to contribute to these conversations. Wanted to recognize our friends at Local Waste. And Sam, I don't know if you noticed, but yesterday I forgot to read the Local Waste spot.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and I was sitting here I'm having a coffee after the show. Why did I you know what? I told a little white lie there. I wasn't having a coffee. I did have coffees, but I was having a beer. I was having a hazy pale ale. I was having a Whistling Pig hazy pale ale.
Whistling Pig is a delicious brew
from Arcadia. That's
is this an Arcadia ad, or
no,
is
it's
this
not an Arcadia ad, but it is going to be an extended length Local Waste ad.
All right, have at her.
All right, because I'm sitting there having an Arcadia Whistling Pig hazy pale ale. Support your local brewers.
No judgment. I drank salted caramel on camera yesterday.
You did. You
it was
got
good
into
stuff.
the booze on camera. We're still we're coming up on a month on air. Not quite yet, but soon. And we're still figuring out that we can do these things. We can do the things we weren't allowed to do at our other jobs. Like, you want to have a beer at 9 in the morning? Like, it's probably not the best, just with regards to, taking our jobs seriously. But sometimes we might. I don't know. We've got a pitch right now. There's a winemaker that wants to come on board. I'm not sure if I told you about this. Winer Wednesdays.
You have not told me about this.
Well, there's 2 wine sponsors that are we're going to let them fight it out. They're talking about Winer Wednesday. So you might have to have a segment where we're pouring wine. Look, the guys at Local Waste are like,
I'm
can
okay
you please get
Yeah,
back?
I was going to say, why don't we talk about local waste, hey?
Can you get back to our spot, Jesperson?
You started out by saying
So I'm
we
sitting here-
forgot to do local waste yesterday, and now we've talked about everything but local waste.
That's right. But how many? But those of you in marketing, you know exactly how many times have we said local waste in the last 2 minutes? Like 11, 12, 13 local waste, right? So I'm having this coffee that tastes a lot like a hazy pale ale yesterday, and I'm sitting here in the seat, and I'm reading through the inventory that we keep, and all of a sudden it hits me. It dawns on me, oh my gosh, I didn't read the local waste spot yesterday. So I texted Chris Labossiere, just like he wants you to call him if you're interested. I mean, he wants to compete for your business. He's also looking to expand his business. If you live in like Red Deer, Lethbridge, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, I don't know, wherever, and you're thinking, you know what? The big garbage guys are in business up here, but I think there's room for a local player. Give Chris a call at 780-242-9746. They love going head-to-head with the big guys. They've been doing it for 25 years here, owned and operating locally at Local Waste. I need the thing in my teeth that can pop when I smile into the camera. That's what we need next.
I'll talk to our graphics department about that.
That's what we'll spend our money on next. So sincere thanks to the team at Local Waste for their sponsorship. Let's call up this Aaron O'Toole apology. I'm going to show it again in the news coming up in about 4 minutes, but I'm noticing that a lot of folks are chiming in on this. And this is what we've seen from the leader of Canada's official opposition. This is Aaron O'Toole, leader of the Conservatives, who at Carleton University basically told students that, hey, listen, the residential schools started off as an attempt to educate Aboriginal kids, and then they turned into something horrific. Well, people pushed back, as you might imagine. And so this statement this morning, the very existence of residential schools is a terrible stain on Canada's history that has had sweeping impacts on generations of Indigenous Canadians. I speak about the harm caused by residential schools regularly. In my comments to Ryerson students, I said the residential school system was intended to try and provide education. It was not. The system was intended to remove children from the influence of their homes, families, traditions, and cultures. That from Aaron O'Toole. So, some of you are writing in and saying that was not an apology, that was an explanation, that was not an apology, that was a deflection. You can let me know what you think. We're coming up on we're marking as Canadians the 5th anniversary of the release of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. 5 years already since the release. Do you remember when that came out? It was big, almost 100 recommendations of here's what Canadians can do. Most notably, here's what the federal government can do on behalf of Canadians, but also there were assignments, really, to us citizens. There were challenges to us on how we can be better, on how we can begin to reconcile that horrific period in Canadian history. And really, when we look back on it 5 years later, what would we say that we have tangibly done to reflect the recommendations in that report? Not a rhetorical question. Actually, let's think about it for a second. What have we done as a nation, really, to meaningfully respond to that report? We're going to be talking about this tomorrow. As a matter of fact, our Friday, our Real Talk Roundtable, it's coming up tomorrow from 9 to 10, is going to be phenomenal. And I'm very excited. One of our panelists, Adam North Pagan from the 60s Scoop Society, and we're going to get into this, and we're going to talk about it at length. We're going to spend an hour talking about meaningful responses to racism and sexism and homophobia and Islamophobia, and our panel, 3 incredible people, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Before we get to the headlines, I wanted to also say thank you this morning to the teams at Dairy Queen in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. There's 6 of these locations. I name them specifically just so you know, because I know you choose where you take your business. You choose where you spend your money. And these are the 6 locations that are spending money at Real Talk. And we'd love to see you reciprocate that. So we're talking about Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, Y Gardens, and Baseline Road. At those 6 locations and those 6 only, right now, they're Christmas frozen ice cream logs. You know these things. You get home at 3 o'clock from Coconut Joe's down in Calgary 20 years ago, you would crush an entire Christmas frozen ice cream log. yourself with the salad fork with nobody else even in the room. That's how good these things are.
Is this a personal story you're telling?
It's a hypothetical that would be believable as a personal story.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy that.
Anybody that knows me knows that that could happen. I've never crushed a Christmas frozen ice cream log in its entirety myself. That's not to say I couldn't. Maybe I find a way to do that for charity sometime. I'm just setting myself up here to be able to indulge. If you would like to indulge in this delectable, delicious treat and only pay 50%, make sure you attend one of those 6 Dairy Queen locations I told you about in Sherwood Park, Northwest Edmonton, and just walk up and say, I'd like the Real Talk discount. And they're going to give you 50% off. All right, let's take a look at the news. Well, we'll begin with that statement from the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Just showed it to you. We want to officially include it in our headlines in case somebody's tuning in right now to catch this. Erin O'Toole essentially saying, hey, listen, I said that the residential school system was intended to try to provide education. It wasn't. The system was intended to remove children from the influence of their homes, families, traditions, and cultures. You can let me know what you think. That statement from the leader of Canada's Conservatives. Meantime, Alberta's COVID numbers, we have our update from yesterday. Of course, this is the story leading the headlines. We just heard from Robyn Strain, a respiratory therapist, on the strain that they're feeling, no pun intended, obviously, at hospitals, the stress that healthcare workers are under. Let's get to Alberta's COVID numbers and take a look here. These as of yesterday. These are Wednesday's numbers. 20,169 active cases in Alberta. That includes 9,700 and change active cases in Edmonton, 9,715. About 750 Albertans, 749 of them currently in hospital, including 139 in ICU specifically due to COVID-19. That's obviously not ICU patients there for other reasons. 760 Albertans have died since the first person passed due to COVID-19 here in the province of Alberta. And meantime, a COVID-19 conspiracy theorist has had his lawsuit terminated by a judge in Edmonton. This is amazing. In 2 separate statements of claim filed in the fall, a guy by the name of Glenn Miller argued that Edmonton's mask bylaw infringed on his charter rights, promoted fear, and was part of a broader conspiracy in which the city was acting as a willing puppet. And so he figured it was reasonable to sue the city of Edmonton for $565 million. Well, Associate Chief Justice Kenneth G. Nielsen struck out both claims yesterday, writing in his decision that the monetary remedy has no basis in law and that the lawsuit was filed for an improper purpose. The plaintiff, Glenn Miller, was also demanding the city announce publicly it would educate itself on the true scientific and statistical data of COVID-19, which I can only imagine Glenn Miller accessed on Facebook. So there you have it. The courts won for the good guys yesterday. Although, doesn't it drive you a little bit nuts that people that are looking to exonerate themselves, people that are looking for meaningful prosecution, people that have been victims of crime, et cetera, can't get into the courts because of the backlog, because everything's so absolutely insanely crazy right now because of
so
COVID-19.
We can deal with conspiracy theorists.
So Glenn Miller can sue the city of Edmonton for $565 million over the mask bylaw. Like, he gets his case heard. But the people that are like family courts or people that desperately need to get the child custody figured out, or you're trying to get you sort of like, somebody screwed you in your business and you're trying to sue them, or you're trying to get you can't get into court, but this Yahoo can get in with his $565 million lawsuit wanting the city to educate itself.
Some days it's a really good thing that the camera and mic on me are not turned on during the news, because there's a lot of eye rolls and scoffs over on this time of the room sometimes.
Because you're going to keep it classy, is that right?
Exactly.
Okay, all right. Is our next guest ready to rock and roll?
He is indeed.
Okay, Dr. Jared Wesley, if you follow Canadian politics, and in particular, if you follow politics in Alberta, you know the name Jared Wesley very well. Political scientist. He's the co-author of the Public Servant's Guide to Government and Inside Canadian Politics. He's also the lead at Common Ground Politics, which is a group of Alberta researchers based out of the University of Alberta, working with other Western Canadians to find common ground. Making his Real Talk debut this morning, Dr. Jared Wesley. Welcome to the show, and thank you for making time for us.
It's great to be here, Ryan.
Jared, you've been taking a look by way of your work with Common Ground over what Albertans are indicating and what Western Canadians are indicating, not just with regards to how they're feeling about politics, not just with regards to the parties and leaders that are resonating with them. And of course, that ebbs and flows between election cycles, between those 4 years. But you've also been taking a look at the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, on the factors I've just named. It makes sense after we've just seen Alberta's updated numbers. We've just talked to a frontline respiratory therapist to start there. So the politics of a pandemic, what do we know at this point?
Well, we were fortunate in a way that we had a survey in the field in November 2019, just after the federal election. And we surveyed Albertans at that point, not knowing, of course, what we were about to enter into. And it was unfortunate that we did encounter a pandemic and put a halt to a lot of our other research, including focus groups. But we were fortunate to get back into the field in August with our most recent survey, which we're going to talk about today. So the survey basically encompasses the changes from November 2019 all the way through the first wave of the pandemic, just before kids went back to school in September. And I mean, the high level finding was Jason Kenney's popularity numbers actually rose over that time, much like other premiers. Seems like a year ago now that we were talking about wave one and how things were going in the summer, and it was bad, but we didn't know how bad it was yet to come. Yeah. So we have to take our findings that we'll talk about today with a bit of a grain of salt. We're talking about the first wave of the pandemic. Kenney's numbers rose a bit, but the UCP's numbers fell by 8 points, and we attribute that to a couple of different things.
What do you think? What is the reason behind that?
Well, we often think of parties' fortunes being linked, again, with their leaders. This wasn't the case here. So we probed a little bit more deeply to look at what has changed over the last 9 months between November 2019 and August 2020. The biggest change we noticed was that people's priorities shifted. So you'll remember back to May 2019, what the UCP's mantra was during that campaign: jobs, economy, pipelines. And Albertans overwhelmingly supported those priorities and voted the party in. Even in November 2019, people were still talking about the economy quite a bit, but that shifted over the course of the first wave of the pandemic. People saying that the economy was their number one issue, the most important issue in Alberta, fell by a full 8 points, almost mirroring perfectly the drop in UCP support. Meanwhile, people identifying healthcare as the most important issue increased by about 6.5% over that period. What's really odd, and we're going to take another look at the data in the coming weeks and months, is that the NDP did not benefit from the UCP's drop in many places. In fact, the only major place where they picked up ground from the UCP directly was in suburban areas. Rather, most of the UCP support seems to have fled to the Wildrose Independence Party.
The Wildrose Independence Party. That would you agree with me that there are two parties whose growth could most hurt the United Conservatives, and those are the NDP and the Wildrose Independence Party? Like, if you see a strong right-wing conservative party gaining momentum, a strong option, a legitimate option on the right wing, this all of a sudden creates a problem again for the Conservatives, much as the Wildrose caused problems politically for the Progressive Conservatives.
Yeah, I teach courses in Western Canadian electoral politics, and I tell my students on day one, there's one takeaway from this course, it's this. In Western Canada, right-wing parties only lose when they splinter off and create two parties on the right? Yeah. That's been true in BC for years. It's new-ish to Alberta, although looking at 2015 elections, obviously a key example of that. It's been happening in Manitoba and Saskatchewan as well. So I was actually interviewing Roy Romano a couple of months ago about another project, and he said, the best piece of advice, Jared, I got from Tommy Douglas was this: your opposition isn't across the aisle, it's behind you, right? And I think Jason Kenney, if we're looking at the way that he's been governing, particularly in the second wave of the pandemic, he's been looking over his shoulder, looking to see how his folks on his rural right are taking these pandemic measures, right? How well they're accepting them. And our research from wave one suggests they were probably right to be concerned, because they did bleed a lot of support, particularly in rural areas.
So when you say that he's been governing, kind of looking over his shoulder, are you talking about specifically, for example, hesitance in imposing a province-wide mask mandate based on how that tends to play in rural areas, which tend to show strong support for the Conservatives? I mean, is that something specific that you would be looking at?
Yeah, and it's not just him. So I read on Twitter, somebody was at a meeting where Minister Chandra was talking about whether the province should impose a province-wide mandate. This was a couple of weeks before they actually did. And his response was telling. He said, what am I supposed to tell the guy in Cold Lake?
Yeah.
Right? And so we're also not just doing this public opinion research, we're doing research into what politicians are saying and doing. And the stories they tell, the friends that they invoke in these stories is really telling. It tells us what, who they're paying attention to, whose interest they have in mind when they're making these big decisions. And it'll be interesting to see now that Jason Kenney's shifted away from talking about, as Chandra did, the guy in Cold Lake, to talking about the ICU nurse or his friend who is in the ICU on a ventilator. That's a pretty major shift in conversation. And that presaged this most recent set of more restrictive pandemic lockdowns. So they're thinking of other people now.
I think of, let me just go on a stream of consciousness here for a second, Jared, because there have been several, and we've discussed some of them here on the show, there have been several little comments that have been made that have had, I think, or should make a big impact on people's understanding of where the government's at, the provincial government I'm talking about with regards to making its decisions. You talked about one. What am I supposed to tell the guy in Cold Lake? There was one the other day where Premier said something along the lines of, I'm not looking for a guy to get arrested in his barn for breaking the mask bylaw or something. Like he painted a very clear picture, like what are we going to go arresting people in their own barns, right? There was House Leader Jason Nixon who talked about the Trudeau tracing app in the context of the federal tracing app, which I think is really significant. I also think that it's worth paying attention to, little snippets. Like Jason Kenney's a very smart communicator. He's a very skilled politician, which is not always a compliment, but he's very good at what he does. And his story about the food court the other day, right? This gal comes up to him in tears, worried about winding up in abject poverty, which, by the way, journalists tracked her down and she said, I don't remember crying and I didn't make any comment about abject poverty, but he did buy food from me, she said. But Jason Kenney managed to slip in that she had escaped Venezuelan socialism. Just a little comment that he managed to slip in there in the term of his story. And you kind of wonder, like, it's skilled communication that's happening here, but it's all these little seeds that are getting planted. The question is, what does the bigger picture accomplish? I remember when Jason Kenney last week, I think it was last Tuesday, when the province rolled out these new measures, and he said to Albertans, listen, and again, I'm paraphrasing. He said something along the lines of, hey, listen, I know you're going to be upset. I know many people are going to be upset with this. And then I think a lot of people assumed he was about to say, you've wanted us to impose measures earlier. You've wanted us to lock down 3 weeks ago, but we couldn't. But instead, there was a curveball. And he said, I know you're going to be upset. I know you're going to be asking why you have to wear masks. I know you're going to be wondering why we're overstepping. And I'm thinking, what? Like, his Premier and this government's interpretation of what people are upset about right now is having to wear a mask when Alberta has triple the numbers of COVID as compared to Ontario or Quebec. To me, I'm sitting there watching that live going, what? Like, that's your understanding of where the public's at? But we can glean a real understanding of where the government's head is at, can't we? With comments like those.
Yeah, and he's a student of this type of communication. Early on in his leadership, when he first moved back to Alberta, he was summoning the old characters that Ralph Klein used, Martha and Henry, right? And he was actually hanging out at the Blackfoot Diner like Ralph used to do, right? So he knows what he's saying. But I think the broader point that you're making speaks to the reason behind the Common Ground Project, because there seems to be this disjunction between what governments do on one hand, what the public wants on the other hand, and public opinion has for a long time been supportive of more restrictive measures here in Alberta. But the third piece that people have paid less attention to and what we're focusing on is, what do people think is acceptable in the broader Alberta community? Because you could want greater, province-wide mask mandate, or you could want a PST personally. But if you don't think that the average Albertan is going to buy that, if you don't think it's politically acceptable, if you refer to the PST as the political suicide tax, then you're not likely to push for it. It's not going to become a priority. That's true for political leaders. It's true for governments as well. So this government is not just looking at public opinion. In fact, in many ways, they've been dismissing it for months. They're looking at what do they think the average Albertan for Shandro, it's the guy in Cold Lake. For Klein and Kenny, it's Martha and Henry. What are they going to accept? And we can push up to that line, but we can't piss them off, right? And that's what our research and focus group research is getting into.
Do you ever, the whole thing about like eating at the Blackfoot? This is just an aside. We don't have to spend 20 minutes on this. But the premier eating at the Blackfoot Inn and this, that, and the other. He went so far as in the 2019 campaign to stand behind Ralph Klein election signs. Like, it's worth noting for people that have shorter memories. Like, Ralph Klein was my mayor. Growing up in Calgary, I remember when Ralph Klein graduated, so to speak, to provincial politics, Minister of the Environment. Our household, we were, big Klein household. And I was always a big fan of Ralph Klein. I think some people might be surprised by that, but there were a lot of things about Ralph Klein that I really loved. And Ralph Klein was also very human and made mistakes and made some very public mistakes. And a lot of people have a lot of angst aimed at Ralph Klein, and rightfully so. I mean, for, blowing up hospitals and making drastic sweeping cuts that really hurt Alberta for a generation. I mean, we can get into the legacy of Klein, but when you talk about great Alberta premiers, or at least Alberta premiers that made a huge impact on the province, you're talking about like Ernest Manning, Peter Lougheed, Ralph Klein. I mean, those are the names people are using. I mean, he was a huge presence. All of this to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Ralph Klein could not stand Jason Kenney, couldn't stand him. And if you ask members of Ralph Klein's family, they will tell you that he could not stand Jason Kenney. And I can only imagine how he would feel about Jason Kenney, leader of the United Conservatives, on the campaign trail standing behind Ralph Klein election signs. He would lose his mind. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, that's an interesting thought experiment. I don't know how those two would get along. I don't think they eat at the Blackfoot Diner together.
They would not be eating together.
But I think to the broader point, and Ken Bosenkohl had a great blog piece on this recently, where he talks about how Martha and Henry are not the center of Alberta's universe anymore, and yet the United Conservatives continue to play to them, right? Our own focus group research, as we talked about on your show, we ask Albertans to draw us an Albertan as the first part of our focus group activity, right? And most people have a clear idea of what an Albertan is, and we ask them to draw that. And most people draw, a cowboy, farmer, person who works on the rigs, and they name them Joe, Al, and so on. Now, the interesting thing is that we were expecting people to draw the Marlboro Man. We were expecting them to draw Henry, right? And maybe Martha, right? But they didn't. They drew somebody who was much younger. The average age of those Joe Albertans that they drew was mid-30s, right? And when we started to unpack, how does Joe feel? How does Joe react to different political situations? We found he's not like Henry at all. So he's not protesting the Pride Parade in Tabor, right? He's okay with the Pride Parade going on, probably not going to march in it, but he's moved past that. He's not a social progressive, but he's more libertarian, I think, than Henry might have been. And as we get in further and further into this pandemic, I think we're starting to see that Joe Jr., has a very different sense of what's acceptable in Alberta politics. Do I have time for a quick example of this?
Buddy, we got all the time in the world. You can take as much time as you want.
So as part of these focus groups that we've done, again, we asked them to identify who is the average or quintessential Albertan, and they draw Joe the farmer, we'll call him this time, right? And then we put up on a wall different pictures. And one picture was of a person who was homeless on the street, begging for money, okay? And we asked the participants not to tell us their personal opinions, but tell us how Joe thinks that person got there, okay? So they take out their index cards, they write a short story about how Joe got there. We were fully expecting a Henry-type response that revolved around this notion of personal responsibility. It's its own damn fault. Didn't work hard enough. Didn't take personal responsibility for his health, and so on. We were surprised that most people said, no, actually, Joe knows people like that, right? Joe's working on the rigs. Joe knows people that have been affected by drugs, and he knows that drugs, substance use and abuse can be, is less a matter of personal responsibility and more a matter of a disease happening to them. This opened our eyes to this notion that, unlike Henry, who was part of a very insular, small community that didn't get out much, and Joe might not get out much either, but the world is coming to them.
Yeah.
And in the context of this, so Joe feels for that person on the street. Joe's now also, I believe, feeling for people who are affected by COVID-19 because it's in his communities, right? And we started even seeing in November when we were out doing focus groups, people start talking about the role of the state in providing core healthcare services. So, if we're seeing the Kenney government pivot to talking to Joe as opposed to Henry, that might put them more in tune or in touch with what the average Albertan expects of government, particularly in times of crisis, because personal responsibility, as we've seen, doesn't solve big collective action problems like a pandemic. And Joe knows that.
Yeah, I mean, that would also involve this government listening to experts and listening to people outside its inner circle, which is a whole other conversation. As a matter of fact, we'll pick up on that in just a second. We're talking to political scientist Dr. Jared Wesley. We want to remind you how important our sponsors are to this broadcast as we bring you Real Talk live each and every morning, and that includes the team at Westworld Computers. Right now I'm running the, what am I running? The MacBook Pro, the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and the iPad. This is the 13-inch screen, the 12.9-inch screen. Why do they say 13? It's the 13-inch screen. Sam's got, now we get to go to camera 4. Yeah, Sam's got that big iMac on his desk. Oh, and by the way, I talked to Daryl at
the
West.
big sexy unit, as we've been calling it.
Sam's big sexy unit.
Good
I'd like to avoid making that a thing. It just doesn't feel right.
You started it.
Yeah, I did start it. I didn't say I didn't start it. I did start it. And I talked to Daryl at Westworld yesterday, by the way, and they're upgrading you to there's a new iMac coming. So you
hello.
get something like he described it as like a little more horsepower.
All
so
right.
I think they're pretty excited to get that in front of you. They've been doing this for more than 40 years. Family-owned, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Westworld Computers. It's your option against that other big store. This one independently owned. And they've got your best interests in mind at all times. Go check out the team at Westworld Computers. Check out the sponsors link at ryanjesperson.com. Political scientist Dr. Jared Wesley, our guest. We're talking about the politics of a pandemic. We're taking a look at numbers. Wanted to ask you about this government taking advice, and you can integrate this into the next question, I'm sure. But Jared, we take a look at the numbers from Common Ground Politics, the numbers you released yesterday, and people can follow you on Twitter and find all of this. We include the Twitter handles for all of our guests. A tweet I send out each and every morning. He's at Dr. Jared Wesley. And I am going to ask you about Joseph Epstein's column, by the way, in the Wall Street Journal about not calling yourself doctor if you've never delivered a baby. I'll ask you that later. But let me ask you this now, Jared. The United Conservatives, how concerned do they need to be when the party loses 10 points in popularity, but the NDP picks up fewer than 2 of those points? I mean, really, does the government have to sweat this at all? Most people are saying this is going to be a 2-party election, realistically, in 2023. And if it's not the NDP, then it's going to be the UCP. So do they even sweat numbers like this, do you figure?
They are sweating numbers like this. They were sweating numbers like this in January when I was talking to some of their staffers, right? This is before the pandemic. They were worried about Wexiteers at that time in the aftermath of the 2019 federal election. Look, I have family in some of these areas where the Wexiteers are popular, and they've never really been attached to the UCP. I think this is a big myth that that party has a strong brand presence, particularly in southern and rural Alberta. They've never had it, and it has a lot to do with the fact that they've gone through so many different rebranding efforts recently. But their supporters tend to be more opposed to the NDP than they are drawn to the UCP, and this is a matter of what we call negative partisanship. It's present not just here in Alberta, but in other parts of Canada, and particularly the United States. People aren't really drawn to the UCP. They're disaffected from the NDP. So the worry is that they're probably not going to cross the Rubicon and vote NDP next election, but they're likely to throw their support behind another conservative party like Wild Rose Independence.
This gives Albertans, I was going to say conservative supporters, but really it should give Albertans pause to think that if what you're saying is true, and you've got the data to back it, Jared, that this party to hold on to power, right, is going to have to ensure that it keeps Wexiteers, so separatists, Alberta sovereigntists, the patriots. I hope everyone can hear my eyes rolling as we use these words, but they've got to keep the Wexiteers happy, right? typically, if we look to Venn diagrams, some people may get upset at this, but I'm not wrong. Sometimes the truth hurts. The Venn diagram that would include, Wexiteers and also anti-vaxxers, anti-abortionists, traditional biblical definition of marriage believers, all of these types of things. The Venn diagram there is basically a circle. And so this government is going to have to appease and keep happy that crowd. That's something I would suggest that small c conservatives across the board and Albertans in general would be wise to pay attention to.
Yeah, and again, I point you to Ken Bosenkohl's fabulous blog post on this. He talks about how Martha and Henry become radicalized by this new populist movement. To that list to throw another circle into your Venn diagram, these are anti-globalists. But I think we had another research brief earlier on this week where we talked about how different types of Albertans have been affected by the pandemic differently. And even before that, how the economic downturn has affected people differently. And the thing that ties these Wexiteers, anti-globalists, and so on together is that they've been most heavily affected in terms of employment, in terms of income, and so on. So these folks resemble the people that we've seen in the Rust Belt in the United States and coal country a couple of decades ago in the United States that feel left behind, right? A lot of them can't quite put their finger on it, but they feel like they're the best days for their communities and the best days for their families are behind them. They're not quite sure who to blame, but they're sure as heck not gonna pull on side with establishment parties, and that's where the UCP is really challenged. These folks are disaffected, the way that a lot of Republican and, quite frankly, Democrat voters in places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania were disaffected a few years ago, right? And where did they go? They went to a leader of a conservative party that at least paid lip service to them falling behind. And that's my worry, is that somebody's going to catch lightning in a bottle here, be more of a populist and popular leader than Jason Kenney, and mobilize these folks to form something like we saw Trump form in the GOP, because that's dangerous, man.
Who do you think is going to lead this faction? I saw that Paul Hinman, whose name pops up in Alberta, from time to time again yesterday, or no, what was it, last weekend, I guess, standing in solidarity with those freedom marchers who refused to wear masks down in Calgary. And I just went, come on, Hinman. I mean, I've talked to the guy several times. Political opportunity exists there, I suppose, to a certain degree, but you'd have to suspect that the potential of that movement is capped. Who's going to lead this? Who is the one that will pick up this torch and lead the far right in Alberta, do you think?
I don't know, but that's the thing. Nobody saw Paul Walker coming up in Wisconsin. Nobody saw Donald Trump before it happened, right? So I think it'd have to be a pretty popular mainstream person that's able to pull aside not just the folks that feel like they're left behind, but traditional conservatives as well, who are willing to hold their nose and move forward. I hope to goodness that we're not headed down that path. But our research shows, honestly, we had a poll recently that showed for the first time that we've seen, more than half of Albertans feel like the province's best days are behind it, right? This suggests we're dealing with something completely different than what we've seen in previous generations of Western alienation and conservatism, right? There's a feeling like forces beyond even the provincial or federal government's control are holding us back, be that environmentalism, the decline in oil prices, and so on. People are feeling pretty disaffected, and that is, a recipe for a shakeup of the party system.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm hesitating here because I'm about to state the obvious, but what it requires is a party with vision to put something in front of Albertans that they can get behind and that they can believe in, to believe that Alberta's potential has only been tapped, that we can. I mean, I remember even just Edmonton called the City of Champions for so many years until they ripped the signs off. Meantime, Calgary's marketing and branding changed like every second year. Right, Calgary was always changing the signs at the city limits, and one of them, I think right now is it like the Heart of the New West or something like that. But one of them was like feel the energy or something about energy, and I just thought, and we smirk at like the marketing and how much they spend on it and these types of things, but I thought that's at least intuitive in the sense that it wasn't like oil. It wasn't like Calgary, oil. It was energy, and energy means a lot. And Alberta has a lot of potential. You look at AI here in the Metro Edmonton region. I mean, I could go on forever. The Alberta spirit is a thing. That is something. But it requires a party with vision, and it requires people, us, the citizens, to give our heads a shake and to like things move forward. And for some reason, this clinging to the past, you can tell, Jared, it's frustrating to me.
Yeah. Well, but this is what the biggest outcome of the first wave of our study, right? With these focus groups, we have people draw Albertans. The people that are doing these drawings look nothing like the people that they're actually drawing. So, we have young women of color drawing Joe the cowboy as the quintessential Albertan. And this is across the entire province. And at some point I turn it back to the group and saying, look, none of you drew yourselves in this. There's a disjunction between what you see as being, acceptable in Alberta society or emblematic of what it means to be Albertan, and there's a huge disconnect there. Most people don't look like Joe, right? And most people don't work directly in the oil and gas industry. We can debate with economists as to how much of the economy is driven by oil and gas. That's not my point. My point is that in the backs of our minds, regardless of what our walk of life is, most of us see oil and gas and that industry being part of our community identity, right? So if we see that declining, we're going to feel bad about it, right? We're going to feel pessimistic about it. But you're right. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of energy in other sectors, and that sector itself is transforming itself. And we've done focus groups in Fort Mac and Hannah talking about how those communities are actually optimistic about shifting the narrative. But when politicians keep playing to Martha and Henry, it brings us back to an old vision of ourselves. Now, political cultures, Ryan, are very difficult to shift, right? They're like climate, not like weather. You can't just throw a slogan like the New West out there and expect people to see themselves differently. That's not the way it works. But our research suggests that culture shift happens when an old way of thinking in Alberta, that old way of thinking, that political culture that's bound up in ideas like rugged individualism, bootstrap conservatism, right, frontier masculinity, and so on. When those themes don't solve the major problems of the day, when personal responsibility is not a viable answer to our major challenges, it presents anomalies that put a crack in that broader political culture. And political cultures don't typically shift unless there's some cataclysmic external event, like the Great Depression, or like we're seeing in COVID. So I'm glad we're having this discussion right now, and I'm very glad that we're in the field studying this in real time, because this might be the moment when Albertans look at ourselves in the mirror, right, and say, we don't look like that myth and that story that we've been telling ourselves.
Yeah. Jim Prentice himself, I don't think, realized the significance of that look in the mirror comment, because you know what? As the years have gone on since he made it, it's become more and more apparent that that's exactly what Albertans need to do. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I said it at the time.
Yeah. Jared, I've got, I always wonder anyway. Jared, before we say goodbye, because I've got two guests on standby here ready to go, and we're going to change the subject. I just want to ask you about Joseph Epstein's piece in the Wall Street Journal. We get a lot of academics here on the show, and his assertion basically that, he was taking aim, and it was described as a sexist and misogynistic attack against Dr. Jill Biden, the incoming First Lady. He basically called her kiddo and said that she should drop the doc until she's delivered a baby. You yourself, political scientist, a PhD, Dr. Jared Wesley, how do you feel about his assertion? Did you read the column, and if so, how did it make you feel?
I didn't read the column. I did read the first line, and then I didn't read the rest of the column.
Yeah, fair enough.
He called her kiddo. It was a misogynist attack against women in academia in general and society in general. That's the way I look at it. I've seen it in my classrooms where students will refer to my female colleagues as by their first name and refer to my male colleagues as doctor or by their last name. I catch myself doing it all the time when I'm writing. When I'm writing about premiers, I often find myself using the first name of Rachel Notley. I talk about Rachel, whereas I'll talk about Stelman, right? This is a societal problem. I think there's a whole other debate that we can have about whether we should use honorifics like doctor. My wife, who's a nurse, will tell you I'm not a real doctor. I can't take your pulse. So as you can see, I'm fighting that battle at home, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, man, if we miss the bigger point that this is about misogyny, we've missed the boat.
Yeah. Let me ask you quickly, though, and I keep saying, I keep wrapping the interview, and you're ready to wrap, and I keep it going. Rachel markets herself as Rachel. Like it's part of a strategy, right?
Yep, and Christy does too. Christy Clark did too.
Yeah. So,
right? so at some point they lean into it.
Yeah.
Right. But the point is, very few male politicians do that. And the only one I can remember is Dalton McGuinty tried to run as Premier Dad. Right.
Premier Dad.
Premier Dad. He ran.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? It's kind of creepy.
Well, but the fact that we
I guess
say
he didn't say
creepy
daddy
suggests that we don't look for that kind of leadership quality in our male politicians the way that we do for women. So
yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Jared, it's always such a pleasure. Thanks for making time for us. I look forward to the next time our paths cross.
You bet.
You can follow Jared on Twitter at Dr. Jared Wesley, and make sure you follow at C Ground Politics. That's Common Ground Politics. That's the source of all this polling. It's a group of political scientists and, those in the know out of the University of Alberta for the most part. They do some great work. Want to get to your comments here on this quickly. Travis says, I don't think that the Kenney government's worried about being reelected. We have short memories in Alberta, which could be true. There's a lot of time between now and 2023. There's a ton of time for a government, I think, to try to make things right, or at least to try to make you forget about some of the things that saw them drop in the polls popularity-wise, right? Like, we're talking 3 years from now, 2.5 years from now. There's still a lot of time. Mayor Blaine is listening in, says, I see this conversation with Ryan and Jared. I see how easy it is to explain how skilled the premier is at communicating or at politics. But all it does actually, says Mayor Blaine, is make me wonder why our standards are at this level. And what I think he means, he says, I completely understand why he's so good, but it's sure not an endorsement on voters. You look at the little things. I saw a comment earlier on our YouTube, and I apologize, there's so much going on right now here, which is a good problem to have. So many of you are chiming in, but I don't know where the comment is, but somebody made said something like, the blue pickup truck on the campaign trail, the staying in the RV when it turned out he wasn't staying in an RV, he was staying in a hotel, and he was driving car service, and the premier would get in the blue pickup truck 600 meters before the event and drive it in, and everybody would cheer at Jason Kenney's big Dodge Ram. First of all, newsflash: Jason Kenney's not the first to portray an image. Right? Let me think of 1,000 off the top of my head. Barack Obama pulling pints at a Boston bar, or Joe Biden at a soup kitchen, or, Rachel Notley, shoveling a senior's walk, or whatever. They all do it. Politicians all do it. The question is, how much credit do you give them for it? Right? It's one thing to say, okay, the politician is helping out at the soup kitchen, which, will draw attention to the soup kitchen. It will remind people to make their holiday donation. I hope you will consider the Hope Mission and the Bissell Center and the Boyle Street and the Mustard Seed and, the Sheldon Schmear Center down in Calgary and all of these wonderful institutions that could really use our support this holiday season. Wanted to fit that in when I see an opportunity. But how much credit do you give the politicians, for example, for showing up in a blue Dodge Ram pickup? Do you really believe, as an example, we're talking about Jason Kenney, do you really believe that if that truck got a flat, could Jason Kenney change the tire? Do you think he could? I don't think so. I don't think that Jason Kenney has probably done much with regards to farm work or pickup trucks or anything else. I mean, he's actually lived a pretty charmed life for his entire adult life. As he talks about business and entrepreneurs and these types of things, he's never done any of that, right? He's a career politician. He's had a great salary. He's got a great pension. He's not only flown business class himself, but he's flown family members on business class for many years. And if you think I'm wrong, just Google it yourself and you'll find out. And maybe it'll be the first time you're hearing about it. But Jason Kenney is not the blue pickup truck, rural Alberta chewing on straw guy. He's not. But he's a politician, so he sells himself as that to people to whom he needs to reach. It's the oldest trick in the book. Like Mayor Blaine says, are we that gullible to believe all of this? And that's the question. And like I said, before people snap, it's not limited to one political party or movement. It's what politicians do. The question is, how good is your bullshit meter? How good is it? When you see it, do you call it out? And when you call it out, are you willing to deal with the blowback from the party loyalists? That's a whole other ball of wax entirely. Wanted to mention Clean Air Club. Sam and I want to make sure that the air that we're breathing here in our studio is as clean and purified as possible, not just during the pandemic, but at all times. And so we reached out to Clean Air Club right out of the gates before we even went on the air. And Brad at Clean Air Club mentioned to us that the biggest thing that people can do, especially viewers and listeners at home, is pay closer attention to their furnace filters. And that's what they do at cleanairclub.ca. You sign up there, and then they handle all the hassle. You tell them the size of the filter, and then they do all the rest. They put you on the schedule for replacement. They drop off the new ones at your home, and they even include a little gift to say thank you. Their way to support local retailers. You'll see what I mean when your shipment arrives. And many of you are telling us that you've already received your first shipment of filters. You must have signed up right when we went on the air. Appreciate that. At cleanairclub.ca, find out how you can breathe easy. We're also so grateful to have our hashtag today, and every day we're on the air, powered by the team at Park Power. That's right, they're the ones powering Real Talk RJ, the hashtag that we use to find out where your head's at. Park Power, they're in the internet, electricity, and natural gas game. They've been doing it since 2013, locally owned, and all their staff are here as well. That means the call center, the customer service. You're talking to fellow Albertans. You're not placing some international call where somebody can't relate to your concerns. It's somebody that also lives right here. Park Power, profit shares with local charities. Yet another reason to take your business to Park Power. You know, this next story is a story that we wish we didn't have to cover. There's something ugly going on in the city of Edmonton. And I think that it's probably a microcosm of something really ugly that's going on all around us. A young woman attacked at Edmonton's Southgate Transit Station, the LRT station, on Tuesday of this week. She's the third Black Muslim woman to be attacked during broad daylight hours in that area within a week. You've probably heard that a mother and daughter, both of them Black, both of them hijabi, were assaulted outside Southgate Center just a few days ago. Police arresting and laying charges here, but these women, per witness reports and per the police public release, dragged from their cars after the windows were shattered and beaten by these men. Of course, when we want to talk about this reality and we want plain speak, we go to the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council. That's where Momin Saeed is executive director, Trent Daley, vice president, and we're grateful that both of you have made time for us this morning. Welcome to Real Talk. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us, Ryan.
Momin, why don't we begin with you? How are you wrapping your head around what's going on right now? This is obviously extremely concerning.
Yeah, it really is, Ryan. I mean, there's a substantial level of disbelief at what is transpiring, what is taking place, substantial level of disappointment, an increase of, how shameful this situation is. These acts are, considering that two people from the community were attacked just a few days ago, and then a similar thing just happens basically in the same area a few days later. So, I mean, there is a substantial level of concern within the community, of course, with our sisters who wear the hijab, who I will add are the strongest members of our community, because they are the visual identifiers of Islam and visual identifiers of being Muslim. Whereas us guys, I mean, right now having a long beard or whatever the case may be is chic and hip and happening. So, that doesn't identify you like that. So, they are concerned about their welfare. I'm not going to say that they're shaking at their knees as the general community, that we're a resilient community, but there is a substantial concern for sure.
Trent, when we talk about the greater impact on Edmonton's Muslim community, and I would suggest that Muslims across Alberta and probably across Canada would be concerned about this. Women would be concerned about this, and Black members.
Can you hear me all right?
Can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Well, we can't ignore the intersections of these identities.
Yeah.
The Black community has been under considerable stress and have been overrepresented in our justice system, and basically every negative health identifier you can imagine. The pandemic has not made it hasn't been an equalizer. We're all in this storm together, and as many have already stated, we all have different boats. Some have luxury yachts, some are holding on to the remains of a door trying to float. And the community right now, Black women are looking at this and worried. There's Muslim hijabis that already struggle with their identity and whether or not it's safe to put on a hijab, and then they see something like this happen, and then they look to EPS and they look to people in places of power and they say, well, is our safety going to be guaranteed? And luckily in this case, EPS did press hate crimes charges very swiftly, and we can commend them for that. But it's still, this has been a long recurring issue. This isn't the first time it's happened, and unfortunately it won't be the last time.
Momin, what happens with a group like AMPAC and the Edmonton Police Service when an incident or multiple incidents like this occur? Is there a partnership that exists? Is there dialogue that is initiated immediately? Can you explain to us how that happens?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do have a great relationship with updates. So when events like this do happen, organizations like AMPAC and others do get updated that this is something like this has happened within the community, and vice versa as well. If we are aware of something that is extremely concerning, that we as well, with our relationships with the EPS, we relay that information to them. And also in the same token as well, then our community members, our stakeholders, they engage with us. They'll send us a message or call us or whatever the case may be. So there is this open dialogue between AMPAC, the community, law enforcement, and a level of trust of wanting to make sure those lines of communication always remain open. And if there are any issues, that they are dealt with in a transparent manner.
Is in your assessment, would you say, well, both of you, I mean, Trent, I'll ask you the question, but I'd be curious for both of your response. Is the response to this point from Edmonton Police sufficient? We'll recognize that a man was arrested and is facing charges following that initial attack. Richard Bradley Stevens, I tweeted about him, 41 years of age, charged with 2 counts of assault, 1 count of mischief following the incident at Southgate Centre. How would you characterize the EPS response here, especially in the bigger picture of concerns, nervousness, and even fear that may exist within the communities that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that Black Muslims and Black people in general don't have the same interactions with police as someone like myself or yourself would. Yeah. My dad was an RCMP officer. I grew up surrounded by cops, and with this scenario, I believe EPS did everything they could that we needed them to do. They pressed hate crimes charges very swiftly, which typically it's very difficult to get those charges done at all. But that being said, the burden right now lays on the Crown. It lays on prosecution to do their job, because we need not just charges, but we need this person to be appropriately punished. We need justice for the victims, and we need justice for the community.
Momin, how do you? Yeah, could you follow up on that?
Yeah, no, completely. We believe that the EPS was very diligent and, as Trent mentioned, swift in charging with hate crimes. But exactly, that's the main aspect, is now the next step forward, that we don't want this just to be a symbolic gesture, and that when it goes to the Crown, things drop off. Because once these type of charges are actualized, is when now we will have a precedent set that people who were considering doing such acts will now realize there's a real life ramification. And this is one of the concerns that we've had. We were out in Ottawa in the beginning of the year dealing with the hate crimes legislation, that the problem that we see with it is that the bar is so high that it is difficult to make the charges go through. And that's kind of where we want to make sure that where we're at here in Alberta, that it just doesn't just fall, that we make these stick. And when that happens, then there'll be a level of trust within the community. It won't be that if you are a non-white person, then, these things don't really matter. But when this happens, then people of color within the community will recognize that, we do matter. And this isn't a joke. And these type of things will then further provide security, because it will cause others to think twice.
We heard from Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney, who said it's frustrating to see another instance of hate-motivated violence in Edmonton. This is completely unacceptable. It's revolting. It's un-Albertan. I'm hoping local law enforcement can identify the criminals responsible as soon as possible. Edmonton's Mayor Don Iveson denounced the assaults, called them heartbreaking, said the responsibility to condemn racially motivated behavior falls on all of us. A listener here using the hashtag RealTalkRJ, looks like it's Joe, says racial attacks are happening in Edmonton. Confederate flags, says Joe, I've seen flown on trucks in Sherwood Park. Public officials need to stop saying this is not who we are. That's ignoring the problem. That is who we are, and it needs to be acknowledged. Is this who we are, Trent?
This is who some of us are. As a society, though, systemic racism, we can't ignore that exists. We can't ignore the factor, this is a hate incident. So race and religious identity were inextricably part of why this happened. And, race as a concept doesn't exist, but the force it has upon individuals and the negative effects is very much real. And, we can't reduce these victims, these women, to merely just being a Black Muslim hijabi. They have so much more to their intersections and their identities. These women were Canadians. These women are part of our community. They're our sisters, our daughters, our mothers. They're the cornerstones of this community. And, with this, we have plenty of amazing people in Edmonton, but we also have to address the proliferation of hateful ideology and groups that has spread and has been allowed to exist.
Gentlemen, I'm not sure. I only have sort of rumors around this, so I don't know the truth. I don't know if bystanders simply watched this happen. My understanding is that bystanders did intervene to a certain degree at Southgate Mall. I'm not sure exactly, but let me ask you this generally speaking. We've seen instances of attacks around the world where sometimes people are paralyzed with fear or shock and they do nothing. Sometimes people film the attacks with their phones. Sometimes people run away. Sometimes people call the cops. Sometimes people jump in. What's your message to average folks, people who don't typically witness an attack like this but may find themselves in a position where they do one day? What's your message to the average citizen from any background, from any ethnicity, from any religious belief that's watching right now, that's listening right now, that may find themselves in the position as a bystander?
I think in this regards, obviously, we don't want to say a statement where it jeopardizes someone's security and they jump in and they get assaulted based off of our advice. But what I would just say is that I think it's important that if people are, say, in this case, there were bystanders who did actually jump in on the attack that happened on the two sisters, the mother and the daughter, and that was able, to help thwart that attack. At the end, I think it's important for us, there's a moral imperative that when we see an injustice like this happening, that I feel that I would personally jump in and try to stop the act. Now, if someone is brandishing a gun or has a knife or whatever the case may be, obviously you have to be calculated in that. But even if in that case you don't jump in, you try to talk the person down. Because the important thing is to make the people know that the perpetrator is being watched. And this is not something that people are agreeing with. And there's a famous quote by Malcolm X. He says, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything. And that's something that I really believe, that you have to stand up for a moral imperative. You have to stand up for your fellow human being, because if you don't, then what are you standing up for?
I really appreciate the work that the two of you are doing here. It just feels like I see stories like this. I see incidents like this. It's a punch in the gut to everybody. And I take a look at some of the comments that we've seen. I've often referenced in my previous employ as an AM talk radio host, the text line in front of us. And a conversation like the three of us are having here right now would bring the worst out of the woodwork, and it would be amplified on that text line. And I know that there are Albertans. I know that there are Canadians out there who, quite frankly, are not only applauding these types of attacks, but they're more than willing to perpetrate these attacks themselves. This ugliness does exist. And I think that conversations like these are very important. I think it's extremely important that members of the public from all backgrounds, from all walks of life, stand up and speak loudly to denounce this type of behavior. And most importantly, I think it's so important that work like the work of the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council continues to happen. So to Trent Daley, to Momin Saeed, thank you so much to both of you for the work that you're doing and for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for having us here, reaching out.
You bet. You can learn more about what AMPAC does by visiting the Twitter account, _AMPAC. That's the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council. And we linked to all of that by my Twitter account. I'm just noticing a comment here, and I just want to address this, especially because it's getting a lot of likes. And I'm like, whoa. Dr. Mana Saleh, who was on the show, she's a professor at Concordia University of Edmonton. She was on the show, I think, 2 days ago. Unbelievable. We had an unbelievable conversation, and everybody lamented the fact that the conversation had to end. I think, Sam, did you see how many views just even the video on Twitter has with Mana? It's like it's like way over 10,000.
Tens of thousands, and
not even
deservedly so.
The YouTube and the podcast, and so like, I don't know, 50, 75, 80,000 people have heard that interview. She was absolutely incredible. And she's watching this morning. She's listening this morning. I appreciate that. And these are the types of things where I just want to have real talk about this type of stuff. So Dr. Salah says, listening to Real Talk, the discussion of the horrific attacks on Black Muslim women in hijab. She says, I love the work that AMPAC does, but I'm wondering why Black hijabis aren't part of this important discussion, which is a fair question. And a bunch of people are liking it, which is fine. Let me be very clear. And I say this not disrespectfully to our two guests who were just amazing, Momin Saeed and Trent Daley, but I am obviously aware that when we talk about platforming voices or featuring voices or amplifying voices that need to be amplified, that the voices of the people affected in a certain scenario, situation, tragedy, reality need to be the voices that we hear from. In other words, I wouldn't talk about the 60s scoop or residential schools with a white Catholic priest, right? I wouldn't. Who would I talk to? Probably a survivor of the 60s scoop, like Adam North Pagan, who's going to be on the show tomorrow, right? Or if we talk about racism, we wouldn't have a conversation with three white people sitting around our studio table here about what we need to do about racism. We would talk to people who have walked miles in those shoes, people who have been subjected to, who have endured racism. I wouldn't talk about a gender wage gap with a guy. I wouldn't talk about a pride parade and controversy around pride parades with a straight person, right? I mean, that's obvious. With respect to the two gentlemen that we just spoke with from AMPAC, you never want to sort of say they weren't our first choice, because I'm grateful for them. Those two agreed to an interview last night at 11 o'clock. And the reason why we didn't have our 9:30 block booked until 11 o'clock at night is because we were waiting to hear back on 2 interview requests, and we didn't hear back. And that is outside of our control. But I want you to know and have confidence that this show is very aware that the voices that need to be heard most these days and moving forward are the voices that oftentimes have not been represented in mainstream media. We are hyper aware of that. And our first and second, again, with respect to Momin and Trent, I realize what I'm saying right now is that they were our third choice. And I wouldn't typically say that if I were not being called out by a good friend of mine and by a guest who appeared on this show, I think fewer than 48 hours ago, in hijab, by the way. So I want to just confront that and address that and answer your question, Muna, directly, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm grateful for everybody that holds our feet to the fire. If there's a story that you're not hearing on this show, or if you're hearing a story on this show but you don't like the way that it's being interpreted or represented, or if you have a story idea and you want to put something on our radar, we want to hear from you. And I'm banging the table even though it's bad for the audio. Sam's looking at me. It's going to spike on the microphones. I'm banging on the table on purpose because we want to hear from you. Your voice is important, and thank you for holding us accountable. We're very, very grateful that the teams at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge have been with us on this journey, the Real Talk journey, before we even went on the air. That's right. Before the rubber hit the road, so to speak, we already had the support of Scott and his team at the two biggest Jeep dealerships in Alberta. St. Albert Dodge, their brand new location, absolutely stunning. Sherwood Dodge, that massive one, that massive dealership with all those selections there for you just off the Yellowhead if you head just east of Edmonton. Well, we're proud to partner with them. And if you're taking a look outside wherever you're watching from this morning and you're seeing that snow start to fall like it is outside our beautiful windows.
I was really enjoying the snow
Wasn't
for a
that
while.
beautiful?
Yeah, it's like you can't see, like, okay, I'll go to camera 4
What is
here.
it? What is
the
it?
one thing you can't actually see is the windows. You can see a little bit of the window ledge.
Well, that
in the
would
corner
identify
there.
where
Yeah.
we're at. We don't
That's,
necessarily
yeah.
know. When you see snow, though, where does your head go with regards to your vehicle? You start thinking a 4x4 might be kind of nice, eh? Might be nice to be behind the wheel of a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Well, now's the time to go check it out at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. We're also so grateful for the support of the team at Friesen Brothers. I know that many of you are going to be making your holiday plans right now. You're going, okay, well, it's going to be 2 of us, or like 4 of us, our immediate family unit, as opposed to the 16 or the 20 we typically have. And you're maybe going, well, maybe this is the year to not do a turkey. It's so much effort. And no! What if you didn't have to do any of the work? What if one of the Red Seal chefs at Friesen Brothers handled the whole thing for you? Prepared the fresh Alberta produce. They had that hot, fabulous, province-wide famous sourdough bread. Warm that up. Throw a little Alberta dairy butter on that. Woo, baby! Friesen Brothers has you covered. 14 locations across Alberta, soon to be 15 as soon as they open up in South Edmonton. It's going to be incredible. Hey, Sam, let's take a look at the headlines. Well, we'll take a look at Alberta's COVID numbers. We know that each and every day, many of you are interested to see what's happening here trend-wise. The number of active cases in the province of Alberta remains at over 20,000. 20,169 active cases as of Wednesday, including more than 9,700 in Alberta's capital city. 749 Albertans as of yesterday currently hospitalized with COVID-19, 139 of them in the ICU. And it is important to remember that those are ICU admissions solely due to COVID. There are other people in Alberta ICUs not related, of course, to the pandemic. 760 Albertans have lost their lives to COVID-19. Meantime, a judge in Edmonton ruling yesterday that a dude that was trying to get $565 million from the city of Edmonton doesn't have a case. That's right. Glenn D. Miller was told to beat it by a judge, my words, not the judge's, after he tried to sue the city over its mandatory mask bylaw. Mr. Miller also wanted the city to announce publicly that it would educate itself on the true science and statistics of COVID-19, repeatedly calling the pandemic a hoax, the judge suggesting that this has no basis in law. Turns out the courts can get it right. It's good to see. And Aaron O'Toole, the leader of Canada's Conservatives, has issued this statement today, clarifying his remarks at Ryerson University around Canada's residential schools. You may remember Aaron O'Toole, in speaking to young Conservative students on how to discuss residential schools and their legacy in Canada, suggested that they started as an attempt to educate and then got worse from there. Well, this morning, as you can see, he says the very existence of residential schools is a terrible stain on Canada's history. He says, I said at Ryerson University they were intended to try to provide education. It was not, says Aaron O'Toole, walking it back. He says the system was intended to remove children from the influence of their homes, families, traditions, and cultures. That from Aaron O'Toole. You can let me know what you think about that. I'm excited about our next guest, April Prescott. Is she good to go, Sam? This is I saw something that stopped me in my tracks yesterday, and I can't remember if we were still on the air or we must have been just off the air. If you saw my interview yesterday with John Mark Earl and his son Jeremiah, who joined him, by the way, the two of these maniacs, and that's a compliment, used axes to break through the ice on the Peace River. We don't recommend that you do this yourself. As a matter of fact, don't do this yourself. It was the 1-year anniversary of the first time that John Mark Earl took an ice bath in the Peace River, and he took us literally into the water with him. It was wild, and he started to share his wisdom with us and his insights and tell us about why he does what he does. Well, it inspired our next guest. It inspired her to create a beautiful piece of art. Sam, can we call up the piece of art to discuss before we bring in April Prescott? Look at this. Look what she whipped up. She took a photo snapped by John's wife, and she quoted him. What we heard from him yesterday. Look at this artistic interpretation. How beautiful is this? Some choices require us to embrace discomfort and to remain in control. Those things determine how we move through our life. Well, that's become my desktop background on my computer, which is, I think, the highest compliment I could possibly pay, maybe aside from having it painted as a mural here on the wall of the Real Talk studio, as we welcome artist and educator April Prescott.
I'm gonna. I hate having to jump in right here. I'm not getting her camera right now.
Oh,
so
okay.
Just working on getting her lined up.
No,
yeah.
that's fine for you to jump in. Sam,
I was trying to solve this in the intro so that we would just be able to get to her. But
this is how, because I couldn't even tell that there was a problem, because Mr. Calm, Cool, and Collected over there behind the producer desk was not indicating that there was any sort of an issue, so I couldn't tell. He wasn't sweating like all of the bachelors on The Bachelorette last night. Did anybody? My wife and I watch. I'm not embarrassed to tell you, we watched that show together. Anybody watching this right now that wants to chime in on that? That was the most disgusting thing that I've ever seen. They're at the La Quinta Resort and Spa down in California, and there is something going on down there. I don't know, but those guys were dripping sweat. Sam Brooks not doing that this morning. All right, let's get to the text line here. Let's get to our YouTube comments. Troy, I've asked you what you thought about Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative leader's walk back of his comments on residential schools at Carleton University. Troy says, as somebody who never wants to see the Conservatives regain power in Canada, I fully support Aaron O'Toole staying on as their leader. Okay. Judy says, replace residential school with Conservatives in Aaron O'Toole's statement. Judy says that does not qualify as an apology. Rose, I don't know what this means, Rose. I'm just making my way through the comments here. Rose says, Ryan, you're wearing purple today. It looks great, but is there a special occasion for that? Is that a thing?
This is probably not on your radar. I don't know if a special occasion is happening today. Back in the day when I worked at the Journal, we had Purple Thursdays.
Okay.
So everybody on staff. Senator Paula Simon still wears purple on Thursdays as an homage to her Journal days. I'm kind of happy I didn't. I went into my closet looking for my purple shirt this morning and realized it was in the wash. And
all right. I've done some Googling here.
Yeah.
It says snow. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Interesting. Wearing purple, I've just Googled it, symbolizes royalty, grandeur, independence, wisdom, devotion, extravagance, pride, and creativity. It says the color purple can also symbolize arrogance. Interesting. Purple combines the stability of blue and the passion of red to be representative as the color of sexual frustration. What?
April and I are both giggling at this. Which is to tell you that she's ready to go.
She's ready to go. Okay. But I got to figure this out. I got to figure out, what does it mean? Yeah. I don't know.
Jespo, I'm gonna let you in on something here. It might just mean that someone liked your shirt, and that's just it.
Well, but if she just liked my shirt, she would say, "Hey, I like your shirt." She wouldn't say it looks great, but is there a special occasion for that? Like, what does that mean? If I was wearing brown, would you ask if there's a special occasion? If I was wearing blue, would you ask if there's a special occasion? Why purple? Rose is in my head. But here's the thing, like, I want to know, because if there's a movement today, like, for example, if it's like, Sturwold says sexual frustration. Sorry, but let me just say, and I respect my wife entirely, and I wouldn't drag stuff like this into the conversation, but I'm not wearing purple for that reason. Let me just say, we're having a great week. We're having a great week. I don't know. Ken says maybe Jespo's got a Barney complex from his youth. Super Soulburn says maybe Jespo has a job interview after this. You know, what a liberating feeling.
Have you not told me about something?
What a liberating feeling to know you'll never have another job interview. The only thing that we'll do is interview people that want to be part of this. I'm never going to have another job interview. I cannot foresee a situation or a scenario. The audience is growing every single day. There's more. This is going to turn into. I'm not going to take this in this direction. I was going to start talking about sponsor increase in this, but let me just say the indications on the landscape are that I will never have another job interview ever again in my life, and I can't tell you how exciting that is. We're so excited to have you on board for this. We've got to get to April. I don't want to just leave April hanging. But Sam, you and I sometimes we take a moment where we're having our hazy. There's April.
Yeah,
hi
April.
Hey. We're having these moments, but this is actually a perfect segue. But we're having these moments, Sam, where every once in a while we taste our hazy pale ale flavored coffees, and you and I just look at each other and we go, "What is going on with the audience interaction and the hashtag trending all the time, and the Podboard 100 recognizing us? By the way, we're back to number 2 in Canada today.
Who knocked us off?
They didn't say who knocked us off, but. It was Spit and Chicklets last time knocked us off for one day. But you know what? If you would have said to us, hey, 3.5 weeks into the new show, you're going to be ranked number 2 in Canada, I think we would have been okay with that. Now we're disappointed because we're not number 1 like we were 2 days ago, but we'll get back there. Anyway,
the goalpost has moved a little bit.
All of this to say, and I wish that we had Zoom capability on the camera right now because I'd look right in and I would just say, I love you, man. I do. And it's not just because I'm wearing purple. Let's get to April Prescott. I do match. She is like, what the hell have I gotten myself into this morning? April, I do match. Sam, if you could just dissolve into her art from yesterday. I do match your artwork. I will say that. It was not entirely intentional, but you knocked our socks off with this illustration yesterday. April, welcome to the show. What prompted, what has to happen for you, obviously an extremely talented artist, to all of a sudden put down everything else you're doing and start with a new masterpiece like you did yesterday?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me on. It was quite surprising when you slid into my DMs yesterday.
Yeah.
Quite literally, Ryan held up his phone when you tweeted that picture and said, we're booking her tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like that. That was his only reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I was at work and I went to my boss and I was like, hey, so I'm being asked to be on this podcast tomorrow. And she's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I started doing this art as a way to process some of the mental health stuff that I've been going through. So to give a little bit of context, I'm the inclusive education coordinator at Aboriginal Head Start here in Edmonton. Aboriginal Head Start is a national program that provides preschool services and wraparound family services to children who identify as First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. And so as you can well imagine, and I know you've had some educators on here already, that education during COVID is a whole different beast. And along with that, I was dealing just with some mental health stuff on my own, living by myself, feeling isolated and lonely. And it was actually at the request of one of my meditation teachers. I myself am a meditation teacher, and learning from him, he said, you know what, why don't you try and find a creative outlet? And I realized that I had taught preschool for 10 years prior to moving into administration. And I realized that I didn't have a creative outlet anymore. I used to go to work and, create art with my children and just create experiences for them. And then you go to administration and you're creating, spreadsheets and and timelines and reports. So I had always just was curious about digital design and art. And so I picked up the iPad and I Googled on YouTube how to draw on the iPad, and I came up and there was this one tutorial where you utilize pictures to create art with. And I don't know why. I started with my dogs, my parents' dogs, and then I was just scrolling through Twitter and I came across Dr. Darren Markland. And I mean, he's a freaking rock star. And it honestly just came to me. I know it sounds woo-woo, but I was just like, I got to draw this guy. And I need to highlight the work that he's doing. There he is. And so I found a quote of his and I copied this photo that he had taken of himself, and then I posted it and he loved it. And so then I just started going from there, and I just kept featuring more and more Canadian and or local healthcare professionals or healthcare workers. I also highlighted Dr. Ubaka. I like to think we're on a first name basis, but
yeah, well, I think he'd be okay with that.
Yeah, and he's been so gracious and kind to me. Just because of some of the work that he does around healthcare, maybe not necessarily as a healthcare worker, but in regards to the law, and it just kept going from there. And so then I started taking requests, so people would send me a DM or tag me or tag somebody that they felt was deserving of a shout out. And so this was just a way for me, honestly, to process my sadness during this very difficult time, so I could continue to show up for my staff and my families, where I would go home at night. And I used to dread going home. I get filled up by being around people, and this has been a very difficult time. And I would honestly, like, I also commute on my bicycle. So I have that in common with Dr. Darren, and I'd be riding home and literally like crying on my way home. Like, I don't want to go home. And now I can't wait to leave the office because I'm so excited to draw things
oh my gosh.
And because I really want to just bring a smile to not only people's faces, but people's hearts, because this is such a difficult time right now. So I chose healthcare workers because, let's be honest, like, they got a shitty job right now.
Yeah.
And I have a few friends who are nurses, and I check in on them often. And so that's really how all of this started. And then I saw the interview yesterday, and I saw that amazing picture, and I just felt compelled to draw it.
Well, you blew me away. And there's an artist, Sam, down in Calgary. I feel like a dummy right now that her last name's escaping me. Sam from the Sprawl. Not you, Sam Brooks. The others. Do you remember? She illustrated our conversation with. We'll remember it.
Yes,
and we'll give her the shout out she deserves. But
yeah, I follow her on Twitter.
Yeah, she's like amazing.
Sam Hester.
Sam Hester. Thanks, Sam.
Hester, yeah.
Thanks, Brooksy. And so Sam Hester did that, and then you illustrated the interview from yesterday, and I'm like, well, this is becoming a thing. And what we're realizing is we're going to need more wall space because we need to blow up a print of what you did. Can you bring up the Darren Markland illustration that April did again? I wanted to read this. This is like his words are incredibly powerful, and I love how you've pulled the quote here, April. You're in the spaces between words, and the pause between the next breath exists the possibility that there may not be another, that we are finite and fleeting. That is a powerful insight from an ICU doctor. Do you have, with regards to your process, have you always been the type of person? I am this type of person. This is my old vintage floppy disk notebook. The cover's an old floppy disk. Yeah, and I always have a notebook near to me because my grandpa Stan used to do this. Stan Jesperson. He was one of the publishers of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce magazine. He was a storyteller, a great storyteller himself, and he'd always have pieces of paper that would look a lot like this. This is my evidence with scrawled things all over them, and he would keep notes, and he'd write down. He would keep, like, if someone said something that resonated. Are you about to show me something? If someone,
well, I was going to, but
yeah, if someone would say something that would resonate with him, he would grab a pencil or grab a pen and write down that quote and reflect on it, and then reflect on it again later. Are you that type of person?
Yeah. So on my phone, I use Google Keep, and I literally take notes from everything, whether I'm listening to a podcast or in a meditation class. I also have multiple different journals at home, depending on what I'm looking to record. I also have a really crappy memory. I played rugby for 20 years and have had more concussions than I can count. and I've also had 5 surgeries. So that's also kind of my love affair with the medical profession. I like to think that if I didn't hate throwing up so much, I would have been a nurse or a doctor. And that kind of stuff just fascinates me. So I like to see myself in this world. I always knew I'd be an educator of some form, but my best skill is taking the information from others and translating it into different formats. So whether that's educational research, whether that's information around contemplative practices, whether that's I'm trained in trauma-informed practices for educators. And I always try to approach life through the lens of like, we're not great communicators. And sometimes what we want to say gets lost in translation. And just picking up the stylus and the iPad and being able to find an artistic, creative way for me to simply all I'm doing is expressing turning my sadness, my melancholy into happiness. And if that creates happiness on the other end of somebody else. So that's really my goal. But yes, I am a collector of words and thoughts. I saw that my older sister was actually in the chat. So you could probably ask her that she would be able to say the same thing, that I'm kind of like a crow that way. I would go around and collect things that had meaning to me. It doesn't matter if it has meaning to anybody else. But when I was scrolling through Twitter and I'm seeing the absolutely amazing work that these people are doing,
here's another legend.
Yeah, I mean,
Dr. Lenora.
She's a rock star.
Dr. Lenora, actually, the second. Do you realize? I don't know if this is not lost on me. Every single illustration we've seen of yours so far has been a guest on Real Talk in our first 3 weeks. Dr. Lenora Saxinger was on our very first day, right after Mayor Don Iveson. Sam, can we see that one again? I love that one. What does she say? Time to get gritty, roll up our collective sleeves, focus, and do the things we know are needed. What a great quote. That's a call to action right there.
So if Sam checks your email, I sent you guys a gift.
A gift?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Are we going to be able to see this in real time? We'll see.
You are.
All right.
There you go.
This gift.
Oh, wow. What's
right,
this?
Look at your monitor, dude.
What? What is this? Not afraid
That's
to
you.
have the conversations. Wow. You've given me a magnificent beard.
Yeah.
And you've been very generous on my hairline, too. And then here's Sam Brooks. We are just getting started.
This is absolutely incredible. April, this is so cool.
Wow. I get uncomfortable when people give me gifts. I get all self-conscious and embarrassed. I always wanted to be the one that like opened birthday gifts in the closet when nobody was watching. Thank you. That's absolutely incredible.
I think it's in our brains are wired towards negativity, and that's a survival nature. And especially in this time where we are constantly bombarded and surrounded by that. One of my roles at work is, they call me the COVID cop. I'm the one that, is in charge of health and safety here at our organization. And so I have to do all this research and paying attention to what's going on, and it can become very heavy on the system, and it's difficult for us to filter out. And one way to mitigate that is to give and to show gratitude. And I just wanted to show gratitude for what both of you are doing. You're giving a stage, you're passing the mic, you're giving opportunities for people to share their stories in a way that like, you're not trying to speak for people, you're allowing people to speak for themselves. And I think by doing that we are just, you guys are also contributing to bringing community together, which is so important at a time like this. So that's, my gift to you. I think that you guys need to be honored and represented in what you're providing for the community across Canada.
Well, we accept that gift with humility. And April, I'm blown away. I'm reading. You're probably not reading all the comments right now because you're talking to us. But let me. Scott's watching, and he says elevating regular Albertans is a great formula that I think Real Talk has stumbled upon. Let me say this to Scott and everybody else. If I can get, we don't have to have April. I don't want to make you uncomfortable by keeping you up on the split screen because I'm about to throw a couple hand grenades. I'm about to communicate with my flamethrower for a second. But let me just say this: there was this understanding in Alberta that became very evident. And I'm just here's some real fucking talk. All right. When I was suspended in September and when I was fired later that month, it was because politicians and corporations went to a multi-billion-dollar company and said, we will pull our business and we won't do interviews with you unless you fire this guy. And the multi-billion-dollar corporation bent over backwards to accommodate the concerns of wealthy people that had their own special interests in mind. And so it was not lost on me that I don't need the big interviews with the big, powerful politicians if they're not going to give them to us, because the people want to have conversations that matter, and the people deserve the platform and the microphone, and the people hold the power. And so if the politicians and the corporations some of them want to get together and have a big back-scratching circle on how powerful they are in controlling Canadian media, they better pay attention to what's going on right now with this audience, because guess what? We're giving people voices that demand to be heard, that deserve to be heard, and that have not been heard in past. And it is not some sort of, like Scott just said, maybe we stumbled upon it. I mean, this is a strategy to make sure that people that deserve voices have voices, but this should not be something new. This is what storytelling should be. This is the way it should be. And talk radio has been broken for a long time, and we're just here to do what we can to try to fix it. It's not reinventing the wheel. We're just talking to people, and we're keeping it real, and we're going to keep doing it. And April, I just love what you're doing with your art. We're seeing more and more. Sam keeps up putting more and more examples. These what you are doing.
April sent me like 12 files, so we got to get through all of them.
These are like, I mean, I even see Dr. Amy Tan there. That we just talked to Dr. Tan. Sam, can you put that one up again? That's a beautiful image. Dr. Tan, April, as you probably know, was on the show just a few days ago to talk to us about why
I saw her there.
She left Alberta. She said she intended on retiring in Alberta. She intended on enjoying her entire career in Alberta, but she moved to Victoria with her family. She's a palliative care and family care physician there because of what was going on here. I mean, another powerful story. But you are immortalizing these people. I mean, these are iconic images.
Well, you just said the same thing through you guys giving a voice to other people, that this is my way. Not everybody communicates in the same way, and not everybody receives information in the same way. And art is another pathway into the mind. It's an opportunity for me to amplify the voices of these doctors who really need to be heard. Let's be honest, they've been let down by this government. And I'm not about to get political. I'm the worst person to get political. But as an educator, we have also been let down. And if it means that I go home and I sit on my couch and process something that means something to me, that then means something to these people, but also amplifies it. I mean, I have a very small following on Twitter. I'm not doing this for the likes. I'm not doing this for the following.
Not anymore.
I'm doing this to...
That will change after today.
I'm just giving this... I'm truly on the same page as you guys of amplifying voices that need to be heard. And I'm looking forward to... I'm going to continue my healthcare worker collection, but I think my next collection is going to be educators, because let's be honest, they have been completely ignored during this pandemic, and they are struggling. And it honestly feels like nobody is listening. So they're going to be my next. So if people want to, I mean, people can DM me if they want to nominate someone that they think would gain a smile and a warm heart from something that I can create. They can absolutely reach out. And
I have such a selfish suggestion that you perhaps illustrate Steven Anderson, who was on just a few days ago on the show. He was talking about he's a millwright, a journeyman millwright, a fourth generation millwright, which is amazing. His great grandfather was a millwright, and all the way down, he's worked in the oil field, he's worked in refineries, he's done all this, and then now he's a teacher, and he's very passionate about how he feels. But I'm being selfish because I only want to see how you illustrate his big, huge red beard. I just think that
he's on the list, so I'll definitely make sure.
That would be incredible.
I'll send you guys that one.
That would be incredible. Well, April, I apologize in advance because you're about to get slammed with requests, because we're going to right now direct people to your Twitter at number 8 _ elements, _8 _ elements. And then, of course, you're on Instagram as well at 8 _ elements. April Prescott, an artist, an educator, an engaged citizen, and what a talent. Thank you for making time and thanks to your boss for letting you take this time, because we were like, you have to be on the show.
I'll let her know.
Yeah. Thanks, April, and thanks for being a member of this audience. We really value you here.
Thank you. Continue to do what you guys are doing. And if I can be of service to you, please let me know.
I love it. Well, we're just going to keep following your artwork. You just keep inspiring us. It has an impact on us in the same way that it impacts you. I can say that sincerely. Amazing. April Prescott. That is so cool. Make sure you give her a follow. Look at that. Like, that's not even fair. That is a very flattering image. Like, that is like, my beard, like, that is like a, wow. I mean, like, anyway, what can I say? And you're looking, you kind of look like an NFL quarterback there.
Very broad shoulders. Yeah,
she
I'm not bad with it. Yeah, I'm not disliking that.
You're you're a fit guy, Sam. Don't take it, but like she made you
moderately.
She gave you a jawline of a Greek god, which is not bad. That's not bad at all. Jess on our live YouTube comment stream says. Jess just says, I love this so much. Independent media is taking off, and it is so good.
It really is.
It is. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but like, they don't know what to do about it. The establishment is trying to make sense of this, and the establishment doesn't know what to do about it, which is just, what can I say? It warms the cockles of my heart. It really, really does. If you're looking to make a move, and I'm not actually talking like esoteric, I'm not speaking, I'm talking like actually physically you're going to move. Maybe through all of this, you've been like, we don't need this huge property. We're going to liquidate. We're going to downsize. Or, hey, maybe you just found out you're pregnant. Maybe you're going to need another bedroom. I don't know. Whatever the case is, Alta Moving and Storage has you covered. So here's the deal. You need some long-term storage. Maybe you're going to renovate your place. Maybe you're going to finally tackle that basement project. You need to get some stuff out of the way for a while. Maybe you've just inherited Granny's dining room set and you want to keep it, but you don't have room for it right now. They've got short and long-term storage solutions, but they've also got those pod-style containers. If you want to make the move, here's the thing. Gone are the days of the moving truck showing up Saturday at 8 a.m. and everybody's got to scramble because the moving truck's got to get across town before 4. Forget about it. The pod-style container, they drop it off at your house. If you want the frog boxes, those eco-friendly moving boxes, they've got those too. Or you can use your own. Doesn't matter. You know, the world is your oyster, my friends. They drop it off. You fill that pod-style container. They'll move it for you. They can unload it if you want, or you can do it yourself. See, flexibility. It's what you get with the local solutions found at Alta Moving and Storage. You can check them out online, and of course, we link to it under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Sam, I'm just doing a quick read-through to make sure that we thanked all of our sponsors today, and we have, because we'd hate to have to walk that back like I did earlier with Local Waste. Local Waste, your 25-year operating, locally owned solution to waste management.
Could you say that name a couple more times?
Local Waste.
I don't think people got it. What do they do?
If you're tuning in and you're wondering what the hell's going on, I forgot to mention Local Waste yesterday. And they were, by the way, super cool about it. They were like, don't sweat it, Jespo. You got us. I said, I'll get you tomorrow. I'll make it up for you. Wanted to let you know, friends, that tomorrow's show is going to be a good one. You've obviously heard that the federal government, by way of the Prime Minister's announcement on the carbon tax, is taking stronger action toward Canada's environmental commitments. What does it mean for Alberta? We're going to ask the federal Environment and Climate Change Minister, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, will join us out of the gates tomorrow at 8:35. And then a roundtable, a real talk roundtable from 9 to 10 with 3 powerful voices on what we can actually do about discrimination in our society. We're going to get real on it, and that starts tomorrow at 8:30. We'll talk to you then.
The